Most people don't realize how quietly money rewrites their lives. It begins as something neutral, just a tool for exchange. Then slowly it becomes a scoreboard, then a promise, then a pressure. Before long, it becomes a source of anxiety, comparison, and identity. The strangest part is that these shifts usually happen in silence. A person wakes up one day and realizes they are working harder than ever, yet feeling poorer than ever, not because they lack resources, but because their resources have been assigned the wrong role. The ancient world understood this tension better than we tend to think. The Bible speaks of money not as a villain, but as a power that shapes choices, relationships, and character. Some of its warnings are surprisingly practical and painfully modern. They describe mistakes that ruin budgets, marriages, friendships, and futures, mistakes that people are still making right now, often without noticing. The irony of financial failure is that most of it is preventable, and the most preventable mistakes are the subtlest. The first of these errors begins where money becomes performance. Modern life encourages people to appear wealthier than they are. Social media amplifies this urge, displaying highlight reels of vacations, cars, clothes, weddings, gadgets, and renovations. Even those who don't consciously seek attention feel pressured to keep up. In the old world, the problem was similar, but with different symbols. Fine garments, feasts, and extravagant banquets both point to the same trap, spending beyond capacity. Scripture advises contentment, not because ambition is wrong, but because comparison is a form of financial gravity. It keeps pulling until the person is buried under their own expectations. Many who feel financially cursed are not lacking income, they are lacking limits. A household earns $50,000 and spends $60,000. Another earns $200,000 and spends $250,000. The moment spending outruns earning, the math stops caring about feelings. Contentment is not passive resignation. It is strategic restraint. It asks not, can I buy this? But should I buy this? The Bible frames this as wisdom, not minimalism. It warns that a life built on appearance eventually collapses, because appearances do not generate returns. Another common mistake arises, not from excess spending, but from directionless earning. There are people who accumulate money without knowing why they want it. They chase wealth like a horizon that keeps receding as they move forward. They assume that more will eventually become enough, yet the threshold always shifts. The biblical critique of this behavior is not moralistic, it is psychological. Wealth without purpose cannot satisfy because it cannot answer the question, what is this for? Money becomes restless energy. Ancient writers observed that people with clear aims, like caring for family, blessing community, or creating good work, handled abundance without losing themselves. Meanwhile, those who chased riches for status or security found neither. Even today, the wealthiest individuals are not immune to insecurity. Many confess privately that they fear losing what they have gained more than they feared lacking. It in the first place, a life spent accumulating but never applying eventually feels hollow. Money becomes a full storeroom that feeds no one, including its owner. Another financial pitfall warned against in Scripture is the avoidance of responsibility. Not working, postponing work, or refusing labor may seem harmless at first, but it builds a pattern of dependency. The Bible speaks bluntly about this, not to shame poverty, but to critique idleness. In modern terms, the warning translates to allowing fear, comfort, or entitlement to prevent productive action. Money rarely arrives without movement. Opportunity rarely arrives without effort. Many people imagine that financial opportunities require vision or creativity, when often they simply require showing up consistently. Work in the biblical mindset is about dignity as much as income. It forms discipline, self-respect, and community value. When someone rejects work, they inadvertently reject those benefits. And when someone avoids responsibility, refusing to learn, refusing to improve, refusing to plan, the consequences surface later as financial instability. This instability is not always visible at first because it disguises itself as freedom. But freedom without commitment eventually becomes limitation. A mistake closely related to living beyond one's means is the careless relationship with debt. Debt is neither condemned nor celebrated in Scripture. It is treated with caution. It can function as leverage, but it easily becomes a chain. Many modern households are evidence of this. Borrowing has been normalized to the point of invisibility. Loans for homes, cars, weddings, clothes, schooling, vacations, and even groceries. Entire industries profit from the assumption that borrowing is inevitable. The problem is not the existence of debt, but the disregard of its consequences. Debt assumes that the future will resemble the present. It spends money that has not yet been earned, under the belief that future earnings and circumstances will cooperate. But life rarely obeys those predictions. Unexpected job loss, illness, economic shifts, or crises can transform manageable debt into suffocating burdens. The Bible compares borrowing to servitude because both reduce freedom. Financial independence is not just an ideal for the wealthy. It is a form of margin that allows dignity, generosity, and resilience. Without that margin, every decision is compromised. Impulsivity is another repeated warning. The Bible elevates wisdom as a financial virtue. Not genius, not luck, but wisdom. Wisdom slows decisions down. It asks questions about consequences, timing, and trade-offs. Impulse demands immediacy. It asks only, do I want this? And can I get it? Advertising plays directly into impulsivity by compressing time and inflating desire. Sales, subscriptions, one-click buying, and consumer credit exist for that reason. The ancient world did not have digital marketplaces, but it had merchants, promoters, and schemers who relied on the same human weaknesses. When impulse governs spending, people acquire objects they do not need for reasons they cannot remember. Wisdom focuses on value. Value involves durability, utility, and alignment with priorities. It sees money not as a ticket to pleasure, but as a resource that must be allocated carefully. Impulse treats money as quickly disposable. Wisdom treats it as seed. One of the most subtle teachings in Scripture about money concerns generosity. Many assume giving is a wealthy person's luxury, but ancient writers describe giving as a form of wealth creation. Generosity loosens fear's grip. Fear says, there won't be enough. Giving replies, enough is not the point. Studies in behavioral economics confirm that generous people often feel richer than those who hoard, even when they have less. The Bible does not frame generosity as charitable optics or moral obligation. It frames it as a practical recognition that resources are not ultimate. People who cannot release money are often the same people who worry most about it. Generosity is not transactional either. It does not guarantee direct return. Instead, it cultivates resilience and perspective. It reminds the giver that they are not defined by what they possess. In communities, generosity creates trust and stability, which ultimately support financial well-being. The opposite, greed, stinginess, self-protection, isolates people. And isolation is expensive. Finally, there is the matter of planning. It is possible to work hard, spend wisely, avoid debt, and still end up in difficulty if the future is ignored. Scripture speaks about prudence, the ability to foresee consequences, and commends those who store resources in times of plenty to withstand times of scarcity. Planning does not eliminate uncertainty. It reduces vulnerability. Modern financial systems offer tools the ancient world did not: savings accounts, insurance, retirement funds, long-term investments, but the principle remains the same. Think beyond the moment. The inability or unwillingness to plan often stems from two beliefs: that things will always be as they currently are, and that tomorrow can handle itself. Both beliefs are illusions. Life is full of sudden shifts, and those who prepare move through those shifts more steadily. Planning is not pessimism. It is stewardship. These principles begin to interact with real life. The modern world makes it easier than ever to commit the very financial errors that ancient writers warned against. A culture built on consumption encourages households to stretch beyond what they earn, believing that convenience justifies cost. Meanwhile, credit systems enable immediate gratification with delayed consequences. Many people assume that financial pressure is universal and unavoidable, but a significant portion of that pressure is self-manufactured through impatience, comparison, and poor planning. When someone spends above capacity, they are not simply buying items, they are buying stress. The mind must now maintain the illusion that everything is fine, while privately calculating how to keep the imbalance hidden. The pursuit of wealth without direction also affects mental and emotional health. People who define success as accumulation often do not know when they have succeeded. There is always more money to make, more status to gain, more security to chase. The absence of purpose turns achievement into restlessness. Some individuals work endless hours, not because they need to survive, but because they cannot imagine who they would be without the chase. The Bible's warning here is not that ambition is sinful or that wealth is dangerous. It is that identity is too heavy a burden for money to carry. When money becomes identity, enough ceases to exist. Responsibility, including work ethic, plays a foundational role in financial stability. In a world with abundant entertainment and distraction, the temptation to avoid effort is stronger than in previous eras. Time can be consumed without producing anything of value, and procrastination can masquerade as rest. But responsibility compounds the way money does. Skills developed early become income later. Effort invested today becomes opportunity tomorrow. When responsibility is neglected, the consequences are delayed but real. Bills accumulate, doors close, and dependency grows. The biblical writers saw work not as punishment, but as participation in creation. To disconnect from work is to disconnect from agency. Debt introduces another form of dependency. It transfers power from the borrower to the lender. Even when terms are reasonable, the psychological weight remains. The borrower must factor future payment into every decision. Savings become harder. Risk tolerance shrinks. Dreams are postponed. Entire generations have mistaken debt for prosperity. Because debt enables consumption, their homes, cars, and possessions may appear impressive, while their financial foundations are fragile. Scripture's warnings are not meant to ban lending or borrowing, but to highlight how easily debt becomes invisible. Once invisible, it becomes unchallenged, and once unchallenged, it becomes normalized. Impulse spending is amplified by technology. The distance between desire and purchase has evaporated. Shopping once required intention, travel, time, comparison, and sometimes embarrassment. Now it requires seconds. Impulsivity is not simply a spending issue. It is a discipline issue. The biblical contrast between impulse and wisdom applies to more than money. It applies to choices about relationships, time, and priorities. Wisdom introduces friction, space to think. Financially, that friction allows people to preserve resources for things that matter, instead of scattering them in moments of fleeting desire. Generosity challenges the dominant narrative of scarcity. Our economy runs on the assumption that resources are limited and must be competed for. Generosity proposes that resources gain value when shared. This does not mean reckless giving or manipulation disguised as charity. It means recognizing that money does not have to isolate people. It can connect them. Communities built on mutual aid and compassion withstand hardship more effectively than communities built on competition. The biblical world understood that generosity reduces the social cost of suffering. One person's strength covers another's weakness, and the cycle often reverses later. Self-interest alone cannot achieve this resilience. Planning closes the loop. Many financial crises occur not because of poverty, but because of unpreparedness. Emergencies become catastrophes when no margin exists. Unexpected expenses become debt. Delayed decisions become missed opportunities. The biblical writers observed this through agricultural metaphors. Store grain now, reap later. Sow now, harvest in season. Modern equivalents exist in savings, insurance, investments, and estate planning. The goal is not to control the future, but to respect it. The future is not guaranteed, but it is likely. When these ideas are woven together, a fuller picture emerges. Money is not merely a financial issue. It is a behavioral and ethical one. The Bible's warnings are not abstract moral commands. They are diagrams of predictable outcomes. Live above your means and instability follows. Chase wealth without purpose and you lose yourself. Avoid responsibility and dependency grows. Ignore debt and freedom shrinks. Act on impulse and regret accumulates. Neglect generosity and fear dominates. Fail to plan, and the future becomes an enemy instead of an ally. These principles have endured for thousands of years because people have not changed as much as technology has. The temptations remain the same. Comparison, greed, fear, pride, laziness, short-term thinking, and denial. A person does not need to believe the Bible is sacred to recognize the practical wisdom of these teachings. They map onto modern psychology, economics, behavioral finance, and sociology with surprising accuracy. What ancient writers called folly, economists now call risk behavior. What they called prudence, we call strategy. What they called generosity, we call social capital. The language shifts, but the consequences remain stable. The final lesson is that money behaves like a mirror. It reflects priorities, fears, values, and habits. It reveals more than it purchases. Many of the financial mistakes that Scripture warns against are not about money itself, but about the human attitudes behind it. Correcting those attitudes does not require perfection. It requires awareness. The person who spends thoughtfully, saves patiently, works diligently, gives freely, plans wisely, and lives within their means is not eliminating financial uncertainty, but equipping themselves to meet it without panic. The Bible's financial teachings ultimately aim at peace, not wealth for wealth's sake, not ascetic poverty, not moral superiority, just peace.